Hi everyone, my name is Shirley and I'm an alcoholic. I had a very interesting day yesterday. I had a call from a woman, a friend of mine, in the morning. And when I answered the phone, she sounded very strange, and I said, "What's the matter? Do you have a cold?" And she said, "No, Randy shot himself." And I said, "Oh my God." She said, "He murdered his wife and the man she was with, and then he shot himself." This man did not want what we had. Do you know, he didn't want what we had. I had talked to him, I had seen him. He wasn't interested in sitting in these rooms on Sunday nights, as we are willing to sit in these rooms on Sunday nights. He didn't want to do that. And he was a legitimate gun owner, and had been for 20 years, and he was licensed, and he drove in from Temecula with a gun on the seat beside him and shot his wife, shot her lover, and shot himself. And he leaves wreckage everywhere, as you can imagine. In the afternoon, I went over to Dutton's, where a friend's son was reading his poetry. She's a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and her boy is a wonderful boy, and he dedicated his book to his mother, a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous. This is a woman who is willing, like I'm willing, like you're willing, to sit in these rooms on a Sunday night. I lead a rich and joyful life most of the time. I have a full and rich life. When I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, I was an empty shell, no question. Christina said it so much. I too felt just as you did. I felt alone and isolated. I felt always as if there was, from the very beginning of my life, a wall between me and everybody else around me, and they could see me and I could see them, but I couldn't actually hear anything. I couldn't feel anything. And it was in Alcoholics Anonymous that I learned to break those walls down and to be able to feel. And so my life was rich, but it is now, but it hasn't always been. And I don't know when I started to drink. I honest to God, I really think it was probably on a Christmas afternoon when Brits used to sit around and listen to the King's speech and have the loyal toast. I mean, the King's speech to the Empire, 3 o'clock on Christmas afternoons, and I think that's probably, I was given a glass of port, and I think that was probably the first time I ever took a drink. And however, by the time I was 23 years old, I was in New York then, and I trashed my first apartment. I mean, I was trashing things before it was fashionable to trash anything. I mean, people trash things all the time now, but in those days it really wasn't done. And then I came out of an alcoholic blackout, and I mean, I had torn the mattresses off the bed, the drapes off the walls, smashed the lamps, and I mean, it was an absolute disaster. And my poor then husband didn't know what to do, and I didn't know what to do, so I had another drink. I mean, what the hell can you do with that? You just have to have another drink to deal with that. So, so anyway, that was what was going on in my life by the time I was 23. But who knows? I mean, who knows about alcoholism? I didn't know anything about alcoholism. I just had to drink in order to survive in the world, you know. And so I could have used a drink by the time I was 4 years old. I was that kind of kid, and but I didn't. I had a disastrous childhood, as so many of us do have disastrous childhoods, and when I was, and I tell you about this because I want to tell you what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now, you know, and I think that we wear the first 10 years of our lives forever. We can change some of our reactions, but I have found that things that happened and the way I was formed come back to me now, even now, and I can only look at it all and say, ah, yeah, there it is again. I can't change it. I don't have to react to it. I don't have to behave in that old way. But if I think all that's going to go away, I'm mistaken. I mean, that abandoned child is always there, because that child lives in me. I know the symptoms of it now, and I can say, okay, this is the child reacting. You don't have to behave in that way. It's not present. It is in the past. But if I think it's always going to go away, I don't think it is, actually. So I remember I was the child of divorce and violence in my early years. Between my mother and father my father was having an affair with another woman, and I mean, I can remember my father knocking my mother down. I can remember my mother bashing him when he was asleep with a milk bottle, and then when I was about 5 years old, my father came in, and they weren't drinkers, actually. Neither one of them. But I can remember my father coming in and stepping on my mother's dining room chairs to put Christmas lights up. And my mother saying to him, "What are you doing, standing on the dining room chairs, put the lights up," and blah, blah, blah. And my father smashed the house up. I mean, he just, my mother, it was a Christmas Eve, and my mother packed me up with my pastry set I was getting that Christmas, and took me to my Auntie Emmy's, and we never went back, I mean, that was the end. We never went back. So shortly thereafter, World War II broke out, and I was evacuated a lot. I was evacuated. I went to the school that had the reputation of being the most bombed school in Britain because it was on the flight path into London, and the German incendiary bombers would come over first and light a flight path, light the way into London, and they were constantly hitting the chemistry lab and blowing up part of the school. So I was evacuated a lot, I mean, I was evacuated and bombed out where I was evacuated. And I can remember, we were ready to, I can remember being packed up with my gas mask and some Carr's cream crackers and the wagon packed so that when the German paratroopers landed, we were going to be trundled north on a little wagon, I mean, and actually, of course that never happened, but there were men, drilling. They were ready to repel raiders with pitchforks. I think they were going to poke the paratroopers as they landed with their pitchforks. But anyway, I mean, this is the sort of this was my childhood, which is no more dramatic and no more awful than anybody else's childhood, but it was mine, And this is what happened. So I was evacuated, as I say a lot, and then came back to London, and then was evacuated with the rockets and the V1s and the V2s, and and bombed out, and et cetera, et cetera. So I don't think that has anything to do with alcoholism, actually. I don't think that has anything to do with the fact that I drank. I think we drink because we are alcoholics. I think that's I mean, this is the reason that I drank. I mean, the first time I drank, I think I was destined to be an alcoholic. I just think that's the enzyme X or gene X or whatever it is, and that I continued to drink until I could no longer. Actually, I think alcoholics, really, who come into Alcoholics Anonymous, I think we are people of extremely high moral standards. And abysmal moral behavior, and we can't stand ourselves one more minute. I mean, and that drinking is, gets to be too much for us, and I think that's what happens to us. Anyway, I came to New York to work for the British delegation to the United Nations, and there I was drinking, and I was frightened of the dark, and I was doing all sorts of things my mother would never have approved of, and oh my God, it was really awful. So I decided I'd better get married, and so I trapped this poor fella, and we got married, and it was when I was married to this man that I trashed the apartment. I mean, I did all that stuff, and we came west, and to California, and I continued to drink. Although in those days it wasn't, I didn't feel that I didn't feel that I was in any deep trouble at that point. It seemed to me that I didn't think about alcoholics. I mean, you think about alcoholics. I think about alcoholics as being, as little old men with big Adam's apples who live in bombed-out buildings and blow themselves up with methylated spirit occasionally. I mean, if I thought about alcoholism at all, that's what I thought about. And then I had a job. I had a job in an architectural office, in an architect's office, which was a divine job. It was 28 men and me, and that was great. And naturally, I had an affair with the boss, of course. And then I was drinking, and I'd call my husband and say to him, "Don't wait up for me. I'm going out for a few drinks with the boys." I mean, can you imagine? Can you imagine anybody putting up with that nonsense? And finally, of course, I had to end this affair that I was having, so I ran away to Europe, and the man I was having the affair with came back. I mean, it was all dramatic, all drama. I didn't know I was alive unless I was in crisis, unless the blood was thundering in my head and I was in crisis, and then I knew I was alive. Otherwise, I didn't recognize any emotion except high drama, And the fact is that his neuroses and my neuroses sort of met each other across a crowd and we sort of glommed onto each other like that. And so he got a divorce and I got a divorce, and there we were out in Malibu, married. Oh my God. Anyway, so at this point in my life, I had everything that I thought if only I had, I would be all right. I had a man who loved me. He used to say to me, I don't know why you're doing this. And, I was drinking, I don't know why you're doing this. He'd say, I love you. Why are you doing this? And I can remember saying to him, you might as well be telling me you've got measles for all that means to me. I don't understand that concept. And I didn't. I didn't understand what that concept was, what love was, what that was all about. I understood needing somebody. I didn't understand loving somebody with an open hand and an open heart. That I didn't understand. That I've learned in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I had a child 10 months after I was married, and I adored this little boy with every fiber of my being. I had a house in Malibu on the beach, on Malibu Road. I had a husband who didn't know what to do, and I said to her, and I was seeing whales that beached themselves on the beach in front of the house. Nobody else in Malibu saw these whales, but I saw them all the time. I mean, they beached themselves, and I saw trees that weren't there, and birds in trees that weren't there, and my life had sort of reduced it to the back bathroom, which was safe in the back of the house, where I fed the baby a baby bottle and sat in the tub and drank gin and jumped in the cupboard every time anybody knocked on the front door. Now, these are the good old days of drinking, right? And so finally, my husband said, I said, it's the sound of the ocean. It was driving me to drink. All these people out there playing volleyball, I said. So he didn't know what the hell to do. I mean, he'd already had one divorce that wiped him out, right? He couldn't afford another one, and so he said, I said, what I need ranch-type property with horses and trees. Make me happy, So he went out and he sort of tried to organize this, and so there I was with these bloody horses and shoveling manure, and by now I weighed about 180 pounds, and I knew that I knew I was finer than what was happening to me. I knew I was finer. I knew that my life was a dung heap and that I was trying to bloom on a dung heap, and all that my husband and I had in common at this point in my life was, he used to check the garbage to see how much I'd been drinking, because I'd distribute the bottles in the garbage cans, and he'd come in and he'd look at the garbage cans. I mean, I asked him in his banker's grey suit, you know what I mean? And I mean, his teeth sparkled. He was Mr. Clean, and I was Mrs. Filthy, and all we had in common was the garbage where I distributing these bottles. And anyway, one night, in the evening outlook, there used to be an ad that says, drinking problem, we care, Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'd been watching this, and one night, Jeffrey came to live with us, and my stepson's my stepson, and he was beyond the control of his mother, and with the grandiosity of the alcoholic in the final stages of alcoholism, with this 15-year-old kid beyond the control of his mother, I said, "You must bring him to me. He needs a mother's love." I mean, I asked you. I hated that kid with everything that was in me. I did 10 years of drinking in the next 10. I sorted his laundry with gloves on. I hated him so much, you know. I mean, it's a difficult 15-year-old. And one night, Dan and Jeff were out at Junior Achievement, right? I mean, there they were out, and my son was in bed, I remembered this ad, and it never occurred to me to call Alcoholics Anonymous phone number anyway. I thought I just knew that I had to go down and get the newspaper. So we were living in Ramirez Canyon at the time, while Dan was building his house with the horses and God knows what. And I walked down the driveway in my old drinking wrapper, and to get the newspaper, and I missed the bridge, which was easy to do. It was only 20 feet wide, and I fell in the creek, damn near killed myself. But I got myself out, and I got the newspaper, and I went back to the house, and I called the number for Alcoholics Anonymous, and Joe Bailey, bless his soul, answered the phone. "Alcoholics Anonymous, can I help you?" And I said, "This is Mrs. Dan Saxon Palmer. I live at 6013 Ramirez Canyon Road, Malibu. My telephone number is Glenwood 77813. I'm 33 years old, and I think I have a drinking problem. And I want my mother." And Joe Bailey said to me, "Well," he said, "maybe we could find you a mother." And I said, "Well, so we had this conversation with Joe keeping me on the phone and coming back and saying, 'Hold on a minute,' and he went to talk to somebody else, you know, and come back to me, and so on and so forth. And so he made arrangements for a couple of women to call on me, and he said, you know, they would call on me the following day. And Dan stayed home from work. When Dan came home, I told him that I'd called Alcoholics Anonymous. So God, he stayed home from work to see that these women were fit to call on his wife, and also to find my glasses, which I'd lost in the creek. And they came sashaying in, you know, with a big book under their arm, and they read me the third step, and then chapter 3, and then they read me chapter 5, and they said, "You're an alcoholic, you know." And I said, "Is that what I am? Jesus, is that what I am?" Had they said to me, "You know, you are a Venusian," I would have said, "Is that what I am?" I mean, I knew I was something. I never knew what the hell it was. And for them to say, "You are an alcoholic," for me, was an absolute relief, because I thought I was a moral degenerate, like Caligula or someone, you know, and there's no regeneration of moral degeneracy. It's gone. And they said, "You know, you don't have to drink again if you don't want to," which was a revolutionary idea, you can imagine. And they said, can you not drink today?" And I said, "Yeah, I think that's possible." I was too much of a lady. I had a stash of beer under the bed, because by now I was drinking 24 hours a day. I was drinking wine. I mean, I went out on Gallo Chablis. Jesus. I couldn't no longer stomach the red stuff. I was now onto white Gallo Chablis. Those great giant bottles. And beer all night, so, because I couldn't sleep. And I had a stash of beer under the bed. And they said, "Can you not drink anymore today?" And I said, "Yes, I think I can manage that." And I haven't had a drink since that day. And that was January 20th, 1966. I've been sober 35 years. And I, like Christina, I had a pink cloud. You know, I was absolutely delighted. And Johnny Bradley used to, I mean, I was the Beamer. Johnny Bradley used to call me the Beamer. He was a bartender, a sober bartender. And when I started, when he saw me crying at a meeting, he said, you know, thank God, he said, you know, everlasting sunshine brings nothing but a desert. I'm so glad to see that you're really getting in touch with some real stuff here. And so that started my sober life. My son was 4. I was 33. And I would like to tell you that it has been one rosy road ever since. That's what I actually thought was happening. I thought if you were doing this right, if you were practicing these principles right, that you were never going to have another adverse emotion, that life was going to be one broad highway, primrose lined, and that I was going to go to, you know, dance along this primrose path until I went to the big meeting in the sky, you know, and that's what I thought. And I want to tell you, life has not actually been quite like that. I have gone from living, I mean, if we're talking on the material level, and I really did think that, you know, that if I was doing this right, that materially everything would be good, you know, that people don't, but in fact, you know, people get divorced, children die, people go bankrupt, life is not easy, but what we are promised here is that if we practice these principles and we are willing to spend our rainy Sunday nights in these rooms, that whatever happens to us, with the vicissitudes of life, we don't have to drink again. That's what it promises us. And I haven't found it necessary to drink again. Now, I've never really even come close. The closest I've come was when I was about a year sober, the first Christmas. I was making Christmas puddings to send home to England, right? I mean, and I had Christian Brothers brandy. I don't cook with booze. I don't trust it. People say it burns off. Well, so it might, but so it might not, and I don't want anything to do with it. Done is done. I'm finished. If I'm near booze, I think anything is going to splash on my hands. I wash my hands. I don't want it seeping into my skin. I've had enough. But there I was, you know, I've got this Christmas pudding, and my husband went to Al-Anon. Oh, dear God, if you've never been released until you've been released by somebody in Al-Anon, you know, I mean, he was Mr. Al-Anon. I mean, he really became Mr. Clean. And I was very, I'm explosive. I was explosive. I'm not your phlegmatic Brit, you know. I mean, you know, I'm not this civilized phlegmatic Brit who never I was swung from one extreme to the other. I was either a homicidal maniac or Mrs. Milquetoast. And what I really wanted was reasonable self-assertion, but I couldn't seem to get the balance right, you know. So I was pretty murderous on occasion. And in fact, when I was drinking, I did try to kill Dan. And God, I saw the marks on the bathroom door, and I said, what are these marks? And he said, well, you came after me with a hammer last night, he said, and I locked myself in the bathroom, and you tried to beat the door down. Jesus, God, you know, and then what can you do with that? You know, what can you do with that except have another drink, which is what I did. I had another drink. I couldn't deal with that. That was too much, but it was shortly after that, actually, that I did get sober. So all of this was sort of going into the punt. Anyway, there we were with this Christmas puddings, and Dan, we were having a fight or whatever, and Dan sighed and I picked up his book, Living with an Alcoholic. And he said to me, you know, you are very sick. You are very sick. And I said, well, you can imagine what I said, but, and I said, I'll prove to you how sick I am. I'll prove to you how sick I am. Yes, I'm sick, I said, and I picked up the brandy bottle. And I'm going to upend the brandy bottle to prove to him how sick I am. I mean, you're getting this? And a voice said, Shirley, you are going to end up strapped down in Camarillo, and this son of a bitch is going to flourish. And by God, that brandy bottle down, and that was it. I have never wanted to drink again since that day. I've wanted to kill. I mean, I'm not saying I've never been suicidal. I'm homicidal. I'm not suicidal. But, so poor old Dan actually got everything. This is the same guy I'm married to. I've been married to him for 41 years. I mean, is this astonishing? I mean, I've got the same bloke I came in with. I mean, do you know how rare this is? They're going to bronze us when we're dead, I think. But anyway, so we've had a lot to work out because I didn't know how to behave in any way. There was nothing in me telling me what was real. I knew how to behave. When I was riding horses, I read the Western Horseman, right? When I was a young mother, I read Red Book. When I was trying to be fashionable, I was reading Vogue magazine. There was nothing inside, in my heart, in my being, telling me what it was to be a woman, and which is what I've learned in Alcoholics Anonymous. And so there I was out in Malibu, you know, going to meetings and life going on, and we had to work out a lot of stuff. Dan got everything that my father, who walked out on us when I was 4, Dan got that. Dan got the repercussions from that. That was something I had to work out with him. I mean, he stood steady and covered his head, you know, and went to his Al-Anon meetings, and somehow we worked it out. And I thought that, and we stayed married. We stayed married partly because I wanted my son to have a stable, steady home that I'd never had, because I went from pillar to post as a kid, you know, with the bombs and the so on and so forth. And I tell you this, and the loss of home a lot, and I tell you this for a reason. I've gone back to that a lot for a reason. When we were about, when I was about 17, 18 years sober, I guess, I don't know, in the early 80s, whatever it was, and Dan's an architect, and he was building. He started to build houses instead of just not only design them, but just to build. And the interest rates, you know, we had a great recession in the early 80s, and the interest rates went up, and we were paying 22% on millions of dollars of construction funds, and he mortgaged the house, and he did you know, all the stuff that they do, that you have to be done, and then we really were absolutely losing it, and we never went bankrupt, but we paid every dime that we owed, but it meant the loss of everything. And Dan had to get a job for the first time in his life. He had a job. He's always been in private practice, and at the time I was working as well. And he got a job in Saudi Arabia. And our kid was, at that time, a senior at Georgetown, and Dan went to Saudi Arabia, and I went, 6 months later, I went with him. And the thought was that we were going to do this for a year in order to pay some debts and save the house and save some of the wreckage, you know. And in fact, I mean, I had to get homes for my dogs, and you know, I took the cats with me, but the dogs had to be found homes, and so off we went. And in fact, I locked the door of my house, and thinking I was going to go back again in a year, and I never went home again. So here's the kid who never went home again, you know. And 5 years later, we came back, and Tap City, but we paid everything off, and the house had gone. And I was 20 years sober at the time. I've been sober 20 years. I was in the deepest depression that I'd ever been in my life. I am a depressive anyway. I don't think a lot is talked about depression, but I am a depressive. I thought that if I was doing this thing right, if I was doing this program right, I would not be ever depressed again. Well, this is not true. Some of us are biochemically different, and some of us have cycles of depression. I'm one of them. Anyway, so here I am in a very deep, deep depression, and I'm not one of these people, you know. I mean, I have people sort of thinking that you've got to sort of practice the third step and practice the 11th step and boogie on down the road of happy destiny. Do you know, I mean, I wasn't boogieing anywhere. Couldn't get out of bed. I was 20 years sober, living in an apartment in Beverly Hills, and totally incapacitated. And I've had the same sponsor for since I got sober. And the apartment we had actually was my kid's apartment. He moved out and we moved in, and with all his student furniture, and I didn't have the juice to get my furniture out of storage. I lived like that for several years because I couldn't get the furniture out of storage. I couldn't get myself to do it, you know. It was too much. Anyway, and people were constantly saying to me, you feel better if you get your furniture out of storage. And I mean, Christ, if I could have, I would have. I couldn't, you know. What kind of advice is that? I couldn't get out of bed, let alone unpack furniture. And my sponsor, to whom I speak every day, I've had the same sponsor for 34 years. I speak to her every day. And Ann B. And she said, you know, you've got to get to a meeting every day. And so I did. That's about all I could do. I went over to the log cabin every morning. And I sat there and nobody talked to me. If you're over 30, they don't talk to you over there. So it was, you know, I was safe. I didn't have to tell anybody that I was 20 years sober and not really managing terribly well. And what was happening to me was that when I was a kid, and I know this to be my truth, when I was a kid, I had to keep going. Do you know, I had to keep going. The war came, I had to keep on going. Nobody cared about this little kid who was evacuated and the bombs were falling. And there was too much chaos going on. And I'd had a mother who was in the middle of a mess with her husband and wasn't available and so on and so forth and all of that nonsense. So when I lost my home, it was every home that I'd been bombed out of. It was every home that I'd lost. It was every family. It was every tree. It was every plant. And I couldn't cope. That's really what happened. And it took a long time for me to get out of that. I went to a meeting every day. I didn't drink. I cried a lot, which I'm not a crier. I wish I could be. I tend to put my face to the wind and, you know, soldier on. That's the way I do things. But gradually, over a period of time, I came out of this. I am one of these people who have no objection to people taking medication if that's what their doctor prescribes. I don't have issues with the psychotropic drugs. It's not my business. However, it wasn't right for me, and I didn't do it, and I came out of it. And what I found out in all that time was that I would rather live in truth than in illusion of any kind. Illusion of any kind. I don't know about hope that things are going to get better. I really do believe that if I practice these principles in order to stay sober, those things out there are going to get better. Those things out there are going to change. But how they change and how that goes is not my business. If I do not strive, I don't work on a marriage. If it's God's will that my marriage stays, likely it will now. Dan's 80. It's not likely he's going anyplace. I mean, I'm a young wife. Can you imagine? So, but even in those days, I didn't work on it. I have a sponsor who says it's always back to self. Deal with yourself. Deal with how you feel. Leave him alone. That's not your business. That's not your business. You deal with what you can deal with and how you behave. That is your business. And that's what I've done. And I've done that I try to do that in every area of my life. I don't really know how this program works. I think it is a mystical, we are told that we have a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps. We don't go in with feeling spiritual necessarily. We practice these principles and gradually my spiritual life has changed and deepened. And I know that God is not a sugar daddy in the sky. I mean, that's what I thought. And I know that God, there's no sugar daddy here. There is just one day at a time going on Sunday nights to these old rooms and staying with people who understand me and whom I understand at the very deepest level. And when I can't love myself and I don't know how I'm going to stay sober, or I'm not going to kill that son of a bitch. Somebody is there that I can talk to, and I can get the strength I need to go on one more day and look at myself. Because it's never them, it's always me. It's always me and how I'm reacting. And you know, when I was in Saudi Arabia, I've always worked, and while I was there, there's nothing you can do in Saudi Arabia. I mean, women don't drive. They don't do anything. They're there to service their menfolk in every way. That's the reason they're there, you know. That's why they're there. So, but I started to write while I was in Saudi Arabia. I was 50 years old, and I started to write, and because I mean, I didn't want to join the drama club and do all this stuff, and a lot of women drink in the afternoons with homemade wine. You know, last Tuesday was a great vintage, right? And so I started to write, and I've been writing ever since, and you know, and this is hysterical. I mean, I tell you this because this is Alcoholics Anonymous. This is what alcoholics are. This rich, full life that I have. And when I say rich and full, I don't mean necessarily happy every day. Do you know what I mean? We are not necessarily happy all the time. Maybe we are. There's something very wrong here, do you know? So I lead a life knowing that if I practice these principles every day, I'm going to be okay. And in that way, I have my mother at home right now. My mother is 92. She's come from England and she stays the winter with me. I have a 3-year-old grandchild that I went to see yesterday after this Dutton's reading for Kaylee. And she ran up to me, Nanny, Nanny, read me a book. And I have a son who was brought up in Alatot. He went to Alatot. Did you know there was an organization? I don't know if it still exists, but Alatot and Alateen. We used to send our kid to his room to do an inventory, you know, I mean, to do a portrait. And that's how he was brought up. And so Alcoholics Anonymous has affected 4 generations of my family. Do you know? I mean, isn't this miraculous? Isn't this incredible? How it's sort of permeated 4 generations like this. And anyway, I started to write, and this is really very funny, actually. I get a boot out of this. I was 67 when my first novel was published, and it was a bestseller. And it was a bestseller because everybody in AA went out and bought it. Oh my God, this is it. It was a Los Angeles Times bestseller. Everybody went out, and then last year I had another bestseller. I was #1 on the bestseller list in the Los Angeles. I was 3 weeks on the bestseller list, and it got to be 3 to 2 to 1. And it was because everybody went out. They were giving it to each other for Christmas. I think they were selling it from the boot of their cars. You know, I mean, people were going out and buying this book, and they made it a bestseller. And I tell you this because these are the gifts that Alcoholics Anonymous has brought to me. This is the rich, full life. It isn't a financial. I earn about 10 cents an hour. It is not a rich life in financial terms. Materially, I live in a townhouse I don't own in Woodland Hills. Now that's a long way from a beach house in Malibu where I started my AA life. You know, I mean, I live in the valley. Can you imagine? And but you know what? This is the way my path has taken me. I mean, I don't understand. I'm master of the universe. Do you know what the hell you're doing up there? But that's the way my path is. So, and I just finished another book. I mean, it was delivered last week, and it's out there seeking its fortune, and that's done. That's God's business. I kept writing because I felt that God was my employer. I really put that into practice. God is my employer, and I'm going to keep going. I'm going to keep doing this. So that's out seeking its fortune, and I'm thinking of a subject for another book, and this is the gift of Alcoholics Anonymous. When I got here, I thought that it was going to be a totally smooth path. It hasn't been. It's been a rocky road. Very interesting, but rocky. And here I am, 35 years later, still standing and here to tell the tale. And truly, I think I have to say this is a deeply spiritual program. And when God speaks to me, it is when I feel the sweetness of temper, when I feel patient with a 92-year-old woman, when I am kind and loving to other people, this is how God can manifest in my life. It isn't a burning bush. It isn't a big voice. It is the way I behave with other people. And I know that that is God manifesting in my life on a daily basis. So I thank you all on this rainy Sunday night. I thank you for being here. I thank Alcoholics Anonymous from the bottom of my heart for the gifts that I have been given. Sobriety, a family, a blood, and my chosen family. And I thank you and I God bless you.